Hi guys, it's Stacy with Handmade by Stacy J. Today I'm going to show you how to make a little pumpkin. And with the pumpkin comes a leaf, a curlicue, and the stem. And this is just a fun little way to celebrate fall and Thanksgiving and any fall holidays that you might happen to participate in. There is a free written website or free written directions on my website at www.handmadebystacyj.com. And there's also a free printable gift tag. So if you choose to give this as a gift, there's a little tag that you can attach to it with your person's name and who it's from. And before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe, as that helps me out tremendously. And share this with your friends. But let's go ahead and get started on our little pumpkin. For this project, I'm using the Paint Box yarns in Simply DK. Now for the pumpkin itself, I'm using color number 116. And for the stems, the leaf, and the curlicue, I'm using color number 126. Now, you don't need a whole bunch of yarn of the green, so you could just use scraps if you'd prefer to do that. But you'll also need a pair of straight knitting needles, or you can use circulars if you like, but they need to be in a US size 6 or 4 millimeter. You'll need a sharp tapestry needle, a pair of scissors, and you'll need some of the polyfill, so that way you can stuff your pumpkin when you are ready. Now you will use quite a bit more than this, but this is just what I'm using to show you what we're going to be needing. Now the beauty of this pattern is that you can make your pumpkin any size just by changing the amount of stitches that you cast on. But for this pattern, I'm going to demonstrate by casting on 30 stitches. So I'm going to use the long tail cast on method, and then I will meet you after I have 30 stitches cast on. So I've cast on 30 stitches. And now I'm going to work in garter stitch just for a couple of rows. That way we can determine how long we need our panel to be to make our pumpkin. So I'm just going to knit a couple rows and then I will be right back. So I've done a few rows, and now what we're going to do is determine how long we need to continue knitting from. So what you're going to do is measure your cast on, and then you're going to double that to create your panel. So for instance, this one right here is pretty close to 7 inches. So that means I'm going to knit until this is 14 inches long. Now you can do, if you only cast on say 20 and you have say 4.5 inches, then you would only go until you hit 9 inches. And if you work with centimeters, that would mean if you go until it's 10 centimeters, so your cast on is 10 centimeters, then you would continue knitting until you hit 20 centimeters. So I'm going to just continue knitting row after row until I get to 14 inches, and then I'll show you how to create the pumpkin from there. So I finished with my panel, and now we're at 14 inches long, and I did a bind off knitwise, and then when I was done with that, I left about a 36-inch long tail, because we're going to use that to create segments in the pumpkin. Now from the cast on, I left the tail that I had, so that way I can use that to sew the short end together. So to sew it together, because we're working in garter stitch, it doesn't matter which is the right or the wrong side because it's completely reversible. So I'm going to thread my needle, and I'm going to fold the short ends together, just like so. And I'm just going to sew this section together. So just a really basic stitch. It doesn't have to be anything too fancy because this is going to be folded inside out, or well, right side out, I guess you would call it. But we're gonna turn it inside out after we're done sewing these edges together. So I'm just going to sew this. Now we have that sewn together, and since we have that seam there, we're going to turn this inside out. It might be easier the other way. And now we're going to start having some fun. This is where we're going to be using this long tail that we have. And what we're going to do is do like a long running stitch through all of these so that this all gathers together and does a little number, something like this. So let's thread our needle. Get to the very end of my tail here. Just a little ways to go. All right, so let's get this threaded and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so now when you are done with this, we are not going to cut the yarn. So I'm just going to run through the stitches, kind of like so, just so it acts like we're gathering it. And I'll usually work about 4 or 5 of them at a time before pulling the yarn through. And then I'm going to do some more. And if you want, you can use these top loops here, or you can even go down these side ones. I might just go down the side because it's easier. But this is going to be the bottom of your pumpkin. So if you decide to change, it's really not a big deal. And then I'm just going to pull these through. Just want it to be able to do a gather, because you see how it's starting to do that? So we just continue doing that all the way around. And when you get to the very end, I just go through one more at the end. Now do not cut your yarn when you do this, because instead we're going to be utilizing that long tail. But go ahead and pull your tail tightly. Then we're going to secure a couple of stitches on here. So by doing that, you just grab a couple, sew them together. That way it just stays together. It doesn't want to go anywhere that way. There's one. I'll just grab a couple random ones. And I'm going to grab one more. Now, after you do that, you're going to draw your needle in through the center. So just be careful not to poke yourself, because we want this yarn to be coming out to the top of the pumpkin. So we're just going to pull that through. And then, oh, you know, this could be a cute little pumpkin hat if you ever wanted just to put leaves on here or curly cues. I might just do that for my next design. But when you have this, now you're going to begin doing the long stitch just like we did on the bottom. We're going to do it on the top. So I'm just going to pull my yarn up through where the seam is, just so I can start at the very top. Now we're going to do the same. I believe it's called a long stitch or a running stitch. I'm really not 100% sure what they're called. But it just helps with the gathering. And when we get about halfway done, we'll start stuffing the pumpkin. Okay, so we are at a good point now where we can start stuffing this guy. So I'm going to grab my polyfill and I'm going to start stuffing. So I'm going to grab just a little bit, put it in. All right, so I think we're at a good point here because I don't want to overstuff it because I do want it to be like good and squishy. So now I'm going to continue doing my running stitch all the way around this. And then when we come up to the seam, I'm just going to do one more just to secure that. And then just make sure that you're happy with where the stuffing is. Make sure you're not super lumpy anywhere. Then we'll give it a good tug. And then we'll do just a couple of stitches to secure this so that way it doesn't come undone. I'm going to go ahead and sew across as well. And I'm going to do just one more. Now, we're going to put our needle right down the center of the pumpkin, and we're going to pull it out through the center on the bottom end. So do not cut your yarn. We're going to be utilizing this yarn now. And you'll want to give it a little push so that way it pulls it in. And now that you have that, we're going to begin adding the pumpkin segments. Now to add the segments of the pumpkin, we're going to be using this long yarn tail, and we're going to be pulling it from the bottom across the side, and we're going to insert our needle in through the top. So, and you can do as many or as little segments as you want. I like to do about 6 of them. So I'm inserting the needle through the middle of the top, and we're coming out through the bottom middle. And we're just going to give that a little pull, and then give it a little bit more of a pull, and there's a pumpkin segment. And now we're going to do that a few more times. And the nice thing with these is that you can adjust where you put them. If you decide that you don't like it, you can just be like, hey, I want to move this over, whichever way. And see, now we're getting a pumpkin shape. So that's one. This will be our second one. So I'm going to put that down the center. And this is where you can kind of start guiding where you want your segments to be. Now we have 2. It looks a little bit goofy right now, but that's okay. It'll get better. And now you're starting to get a pumpkin shape. So go ahead and do any changes you want to do. I do want to move this one just a tiny bit. And I think I'm happy with that. So when you are happy with it, give it a nice little secure, and then sew a few stitches on the bottom just to really secure your segments. And then I'll let this be my last one. Now normally I don't do knots in my work, but for the pumpkin I do. So I'm just going to do a tiny little knot here. And however you do it, it's totally up to you, as long as your piece is secure. And now you can cut your yarn. But I think before I do, I'm going to run it through the center. And then I'll give it a little cut. And then there's the pumpkin. Now we'll work on the leaf, the curlicue, and the stem. Now for the stem of the pumpkin, I'm going to leave about a 10 to 12 inch tail right before I do the cast on. So I'm going to pull out just a little bit more yarn, and I'm going to use the long tail cast on method, and I'm going to just cast on 10 stitches. And this is something that you can do longer or shorter if you like. I've even seen some people use cinnamon sticks for their stems for pumpkins, or they can find actual sticks. But just to keep this nice and soft and squishy, I'm going to do a knit stem. So I'm casting on 10 with the long tail cast on method. And then you're going to be amazed at how quickly this works up. So I'm going to grab my other needle, and we're going to work the garter stitch just until it measures about 3/4 of an inch long. So in my case, it'll probably take about 6 rows. So I'm just going to knit these 10, then I'll knit another row, and then another row until we measure about 3/4 of an inch. So now I have this little piece right here, and it measures just about 3/4 of an inch. So now I'm going to bind off knitwise. And when I do, I'm going to leave 12 inches of my working yarn. When I cut it, I'm going to leave at least a 12-inch tail so I can use that to secure to the pumpkin. So I'm going to bind off knitwise, and then I will show you how to attach this to the pumpkin. Before we attach this to the pumpkin, we have one step that we need to do. So we're going to fold it in half, and then we're going to sew it together using the shorter tail that we have from the one from our cast on. So when we do this, let me just show you a quick little thing. When you sew it together, I don't do anything fancy because you really don't end up seeing it. But before you start working your way down the side, sew up the top of the stem, because this is going to be the top up here. So get that sewn up, and then start working down the side. However, as you work down the side, don't sew up the bottom portion, because that's going to be attached to the pumpkin. So I'm just going to speed this up. Now as you're approaching the bottom, I'm going to do one more stitch. And then I'm going to go up through the center about halfway. And this is just to secure the yarn, but also I'm going to give it a tug, because when I do, that makes the stem bend just a little bit. And then I'll just go right back down it, just so that the stem has a bend. And then you can go once more if you just want to do that to secure your yarn, however you want to secure your ends. It's completely up to you. Then we're going to attach. So now I'm going to trim this. And now to attach to the pumpkin, and you see how its stem has its little bend. It almost looks like a caterpillar. Then you're going to thread your tapestry needle. And your pumpkin, we're going to just insert our needle right down the center of the top, and it'll come out the center of the bottom. Just pull your yarn through, and as you pull it, there's your stem. But you want to go through a few times just to make sure that it's nice and secure. So when it comes back up, grab a part that wasn't sewn in when you sewed the stem together, when you folded it in half. Grab some bits and pieces of that to attach it. And just go up and down the center a couple times, just to attach that stem. And you will find it gets a little bit more challenging because you've built up so much yarn in that center. But that's okay. You don't want this guy going anywhere. And then if you see any loose areas, feel free to attach that way too. And then I'm just going to secure it with a stitch. And I'm going to give it a small knot. Again, I'm not a fan of knots. However, this is at the bottom of the pumpkin and you really can barely even see it. But it's totally up to you with how you'd like to secure them. And then before I tie that off, I'm just going to do one more right up the center, right up through the stem. And then I'll cut the yarn. And now your pumpkin has a stem. Now it really looks like a pumpkin. So our next step is to make the leaf. So I have a couple different color examples to show you of the leaf. Some folks prefer to do it in browns or oranges. I'm going to be doing this example using the green. And before sewing it onto the pumpkin, I'm going to walk you through how to do the curlicue as well. And then we're going to sew both of them together at the same time. When we do the cast on for the leaf, I'm going to leave probably about 8 to 10 inches of a tail before I do the cast on. And the cast on is very simple. We're just going to do one stitch. So just your slip stitch. Now for our first row, we're going to do a knit front, back, front. This way we end up with 3 stitches as this first stitch. So now this first one can be a little bit tricky. So you're going to do a knit front and back as you normally would. So we're knitting the front, knitting the back, and then we're going to bring our needle around and knit through the front once more. Just like so. So I'm going to walk you through that one more time. So we're going to knit into the front as we normally would, bring our needle around, knit into the back, and then bring it around, knit into the front again. Then we'll just tighten that up, and now we have 3 stitches on our needle. For row 2, and the way that this leaf works is we're going to be doing increases all the way up to the middle. And then in the middle, we work a knit row, and then we do decreases. So for row 2, we're going to begin with a knit 1. Then we're going to do the knit front, back, and front once more in that middle stitch. So knit in the front, knit in the back, and knit in the front again. And then we're going to knit that last stitch. And this will bring us up to 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now row 3, this is now what's considered your wrong side. We're going to begin working a little bit of the stockinette section. So we're going to begin by purling 1. And then we're going to purl through the front and the back. So purl into the front and purl into the back. And we're going to do that one more time. So purl 1, purl into the front, and purl into the back. And then purl that last stitch. Then we'll turn our work. Now we should have 7 stitches on our needles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we're going to knit 2. Knit 1, knit 2. Then we're going to knit into the front and the back. Just a simple knit in the front and the back. And then we're going to knit 1. Then we're going to knit into the front and the back once more. And we'll end by knitting these last 2 stitches. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches. Now we'll turn our work, and we're going to begin by purling 3. So 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to purl into the front and purl into the back. Then purl 1. So you'll notice a little pattern where in the center stitch we're always going to knit or purl. We're keeping a stockinette ridge going through the middle. But then on the stitches that are right on the other side, the stitches that bookend that middle stitch, that's where our increases go. So we just did our purl 1 in that middle stitch. So now we're going to purl into the front and into the back. And then we end by purling 3. 1, 2, 3. And now we should have 11 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And that's the most stitches you're going to have on the leaf. So now we're just going to knit across the next row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now we're going to begin our decreases. But you see how it starts off with a little bit of a leaf shape here. So now, on the wrong side, we're going to do a purl 3. So we're going to purl those first 3 stitches. So 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to purl 2 together. Then purl 1, and then purl 2 together. So just like with the increases, now our decreases are going to bookend that middle stitch. And now purl 3. 1, 2, 3. And this should take us down to 9 stitches on the needle. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So then we'll turn our work. And we're going to begin by knitting 2. So 1, 2. Then we're going to knit 2 together. And knit 1. Then knit 2 together. And knit those last 2. Now we should have 7 stitches. 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Now we'll rotate, and we're going to begin with a purl 1, and we're going to purl 2 together. Then purl 1 and purl 2 together, and purl 1. And this takes us back down to 5 stitches. And this one is going to be our last row. So we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to knit the next 3 together. So taking these 3 stitches, we're going to knit them all together. And I'm going to tighten that up just a little bit, and then knit that last stitch. Now, we're going to trim our yarn, but we're going to give it a little bit of a tail. And then we'll take our tapestry needle. Actually, I want to grab a sharper one. We're going to thread our tapestry needle. And then we're going to, whoops, that's a little bit of a mess. We're going to try threading this again. All right. Now we're going to take our stitches and we're going to transfer them onto this needle. So 1, 2, 3. Put our knitting needle aside. And then we're going to draw this yarn tail through all 3 of those. And then pull it tight. And see, there's the back side of your leaf. Here's the front side of your leaf. Now we'll just get this woven in nice and snug. Just weave in your ends. And once you have that in, go ahead and trim your yarn. And there we go. So now be sure to leave this tail because we're going to use it to sew onto the pumpkin after we do the curlicue. In working on this pattern, I work the curlicues 3 different ways, but the one that I'm going to show you involves the second sample I made. So the first one was this little guy. Let me move these to the side. And see, it works as a curlicue, but it is very, very loose, which could be great if that's what you're looking for. And I will have the written directions on how to do this on the blog. But what we're going to be doing is the second sample I did. So it's a little bit tighter, and I think it works really well for the pumpkin. And it's just kind of a cute little guy. And then I tried a third one, and it got pretty tight, but I feel like it got a little bit wonky. So this one, I'm just going to kind of put it aside, and we'll forget that it even existed. But the second one is the one that we will be doing for the example for the pumpkin. Now the curlicues can be made in any size. You just work on any number of stitches. But I'm beginning ours just by casting on 20 because that seems to do the trick for what we're doing for the pumpkin. Then you only work 1 row, and then we're going to bind off a row. So this is super, super easy. All we're going to do is a knit in the front, a back, and the front. And that's all we're going to do across in every stitch. So knit in the front, knit in the back, and then knit in the front. So you're increasing it by 2 stitches on every stitch. So here I have 3 out of that 1. So by the time you finish this 20, you'll actually have 60. So we're going to do that again. Knit in the front, the back, and then the front again. So just do that all the way across, and I'll meet you at the end. I've done the knit front, back, front in every stitch, and you'll probably feel that it feels a little bit tight on your needle. But that's okay, because we're not really going to work these. So instead, all we're going to do is bind off every stitch knitwise. And as you do that, you'll start feeling that curlicue take shape. So just knit, bind off knitwise. And then I'll meet you at the end of this, so that way we can assemble our pumpkin. So now we have all of our bits and pieces to create the finished bit of the pumpkin. Now, these 2 tails are pretty close together. So what I'm going to do is just tie a little knot just to make them really come together, because this is what's going to be sewn to the base of your pumpkin anyways. So I'm going to determine where I want to sew my leaf first before I sew on the curlicue. So just place it around your pumpkin, see where you want it to be. I think I like it right about there. And then I think my leaf is just going to go on the side there. Or, you know, maybe I changed my mind. Maybe instead I want it to go at the base. Or, oh, there we go, at the base of the curlicue. I think that'll work. So I'm going to sew my leaf on this end right here of the curlicue. So I'm just going to attach that Probably should have left a little bit longer of a tail just because I like a little bit of space, but that's okay. So I'm just going to sew this on. Now we can attach this to the pumpkin. So I'm going to actually thread both strands of yarn onto my needle. I'm all about security, you know, making sure everything sticks. And because they're different lengths, I'll just make sure that we're in the same tension there. All right. So now I'm just going to sew this to my pumpkin. Do a little bit of finagling. Make sure it's where I like it. And secure it. And you also want to make sure you're not getting anything tangled. There we go. And if you want, you can even do one of these numbers where you just go through the pumpkin. I'm kind of a fan of that, if you haven't been able to tell yet. Boy, oh boy, it's getting tough. We have your pumpkin. Now we also have on the website little printable gift tags, and you can attach that to your pumpkin so that you could use this as a place setting for maybe your Thanksgiving dinner or any kind of your holiday get-togethers. So if you wanted to make a little pumpkin just to set on a plate, you could totally do that. I think it'd be a fun little gift to give away to your guests. But I do hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, like and subscribe, and I will see you later. Happy knitting. Bye-bye.